The phone call came at 2:47 a.m., jolting me awake in my cramped studio apartment. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me to answer. What I heard next would shatter everything I thought I knew about trust, family, and the dangerous game I'd been playing for the past 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Miss Rodriguez, this is Agent Patricia Wong with the FBI. We need to talk about your vehicle. Specifically, we need to know why a 2019 Honda Civic registered under your name is currently equipped with military-grade surveillance equipment that's been pinging our federal monitoring systems all night. My blood turned to ice. The Honda Civic. My car. The car that should have been sitting safely in the parking garage beneath my building. The car that contains secrets worth more than my brother Kyle could ever imagine. The car that, as I stumbled to my window and peered down at the empty parking space below, was clearly no longer where I'd left it. There must be some mistake, I whispered into the phone, though even as the words left my mouth, a sinking realization was creeping through my chest like poison. My car is parked downstairs. Ma'am, your vehicle was sold yesterday afternoon at Thompson's Auto Sales on Camelback Road. The new owner discovered some unusual equipment during a routine inspection and contacted local authorities. When they ran the serial numbers, it triggered several federal databases. We need you to come in immediately. The room spun around me as the pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Kyle, my younger brother Kyle, who had been asking about my car for weeks, commenting on how I never used the thing anyway, who had been making jokes about me taking the bus everywhere like some college kid who couldn't afford gas. Kyle, who thought I was just another boring office worker pushing papers at a generic tech company, completely oblivious to what my real job actually entailed. Kyle, who had somehow gotten hold of my spare keys and sold my car without telling me. Kyle, who had just unknowingly exposed a 2-year undercover operation that could get me killed. 3 hours later, I sat across from Agent Wong in a sterile conference room at the federal building downtown, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unflattering shadows that made the whole situation feel like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Let's start from the beginning, Agent Wong said, her voice professional but not unkind. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every micro-expression that crossed my face. You work for Meridian Technologies as a data analyst, correct? That's my cover story, I admitted quietly, surprising myself with how easily the truth spilled out. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was relief at finally being able to talk to someone who understood the weight of what I'd been carrying. I'm actually a contractor for the Department of Defense. Cyber intelligence. For the past 2 years, I've been working undercover, gathering information on a network of defense contractors who we suspected were selling classified technology to foreign buyers. Agent Wong's pen paused over her notepad. And the tracker in your vehicle. Standard protocol for deep cover operatives. The car was equipped with a monitoring system that allowed my handlers to keep tabs on my location during high-risk operations. It also contained encrypted hard drives with evidence I'd been collecting, and communication equipment for emergency extractions. I took a shaky sip of the cold coffee. Everything I needed to stay alive and complete my mission was in that car, and your family doesn't know about any of this. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. They think I'm a failure. My parents, my brother Kyle, they all think I'm this pathetic 26-year-old who couldn't hack it in the real world, who ended up in some dead-end office job making barely enough to afford a studio apartment in the worst part of town. I laughed bitterly. Kyle's been on my case for months about getting my life together, about how embarrassing it is to have a sister who takes the bus everywhere and eats ramen for dinner. The irony was crushing. While Kyle had been lecturing me about responsibility and success, I'd been risking my life to protect national security. While my parents had been making disappointed comments about my lack of ambition, I'd been building cases that had already resulted in 3 major arrests and the recovery of millions of dollars in stolen military technology. Agent Wong leaned back in her chair. Tell me about yesterday. When did you last see your vehicle? Tuesday morning. I parked it in my usual spot and took the bus to work. It's part of my cover, the struggling young professional who can't afford gas, who's trying to save money by using public transportation. I've been maintaining that image for 2 years. My voice cracked slightly. I never thought my own brother would. Had he expressed interest in the car before? Constantly, Kyle's always been jealous of anything I had, even when we were kids. But lately it got worse. He's been having money problems. Got laid off from his construction job 3 months ago, and his girlfriend moved out because he couldn't make rent on their apartment. He moved back in with our parents, and I think it's been eating at him. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building. Last week he actually asked if he could borrow the car to go to some job interviews. When I said no, he got angry. Said I was being selfish, that I never drove it anyway. But you do drive it. For work, yes. Surveillance operations, meetings with informants, following suspects. But I had to be careful. I couldn't let my family see me using it too often, or they'd start asking questions about where I was going, why I suddenly had money for gas. The full stupidity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. I was so focused on protecting my cover from the people I was investigating that I left myself vulnerable to my own family. Agent Wong made another note. How did he get access to your keys? The memory made my stomach churn. He's been staying at our parents' house, and I had dinner there last Sunday. I must have left my purse unattended at some point. Kyle's always been good with his hands. He probably made a copy of the spare key I keep in my wallet. I closed my eyes, remembering how he'd volunteered to help clean up after dinner, how he'd been unusually helpful and cheerful. He played me. My own brother played me. The car was sold to a Marcus Thompson at Thompson's Auto Sales for $8,000. Do you know if your brother was aware of the vehicle's actual value? The car's worth at least $15,000, maybe more. But Kyle wouldn't have done his research. He just saw an opportunity to make quick money and took it. My hands clenched into fists. $8,000. He sold out a federal operation for $8,000. Agent Wong's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Mr. Thompson discovered the surveillance equipment when he was preparing the vehicle for resale. He's been fully cooperative with our investigation, and he's agreed to return the vehicle and its contents immediately. However, we need to assess the damage to your operation. The damage? As if my shattered relationship with my family was just collateral in some bureaucratic report. As if the humiliation of having my own brother steal from me was just another line item in a case file. The encrypted drives, I said suddenly. Panic rising in my chest. Did Thompson access them? Did Kyle? The encryption held. Mr. Thompson is a legitimate businessman who contacted authorities as soon as he realized what he was dealing with. As for your brother, Agent Wong consulted her notes. According to Mr. Thompson, Kyle Rodriguez seemed to be in a hurry to complete the sale. He didn't ask many questions and left immediately after receiving payment. Because he knew what he was doing was wrong. The anger was building now, hot and fierce. He knew he was stealing from me, and he did it anyway. Agent Wong leaned forward. Miss Rodriguez, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. While your cover may not have been directly compromised, the exposure of federal surveillance equipment to civilian authorities has triggered multiple security protocols. We need to determine whether this was simply a family dispute that went wrong, or if there's a deeper threat to your operation. You think Kyle might be working with someone. We have to consider all possibilities. The timing is suspicious. You're at a crucial phase in your investigation, and suddenly your surveillance equipment is exposed. It could be coincidence, or it could be something more. The thought that Kyle might be involved in something bigger, something darker than simple theft, made my chest tight with panic. But even as the possibility terrified me, I knew it wasn't true. Kyle wasn't some criminal mastermind or foreign agent. He was just my selfish, impulsive little brother, who had always taken shortcuts and never considered the consequences of his actions. It's not a conspiracy, I said firmly. Kyle's not smart enough for that, and he's not politically motivated. He's just, I struggled for the right words. He's just someone who's never learned that other people's lives matter. He sees something he wants, and he takes it, and he doesn't think about how it might affect anyone else. Agent Wong made another note. We'll need to interview him, obviously. And we'll need to conduct a full security review of your operation. In the meantime, you're being pulled from active duty pending the investigation. The words hit me like a physical blow. 2 years of work, 2 years of carefully building trust with sources, 2 years of gathering evidence that could take down a major smuggling operation, and it was all gone because my brother wanted beer money. For how long? That depends on what we find. If this really is just a family matter that got out of hand, you might be back in the field within a few weeks. But if there are security concerns. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. I might never get back to the work that had become my entire life. Agent Wong stood up, signaling the end of our interview. We'll need you to stay available for further questioning. And Miss Rodriguez, I strongly advise against confronting your brother directly until we've completed our investigation. Let us handle this through official channels. But as I walked out of the federal building into the harsh Arizona sunshine, I knew I couldn't wait for official channels. Kyle had stolen more than just my car. He'd stolen my purpose, my mission, potentially my entire career. And he'd done it without a second thought, probably while laughing about his pathetic sister who wouldn't even notice her car was missing. The ride home on the bus felt like the longest trip of my life. Every mile that passed brought me closer to a confrontation I'd been avoiding for years, closer to the moment when I'd have to look my little brother in the eye and ask him why he'd betrayed me so completely. But first I had to decide whether I was going to tell him the truth about who I really was.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Or let him keep believing he'd just stolen some worthless Honda from his loser sister. The funny thing was, after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure which option would hurt him more. As the bus pulled into my neighborhood, I caught sight of a familiar figure leaning against a beat-up pickup truck in the parking lot of my apartment complex. Kyle with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and that same sheepish expression he'd worn as a kid when he'd broken something valuable. He'd come to confess, probably expecting tears and pleading, expecting me to be grateful that he was being honest about what he'd done. He had no idea that federal agents were probably already on their way to our parents' house, that his harmless theft had triggered investigations that reached the highest levels of national security. He had no idea that his big sister wasn't the failure he thought she was. And as I stepped off the bus and started walking toward him, I realized that I was about to enjoy watching his world completely fall apart. Kyle straightened up when he saw me approaching, his face already arranging itself into that practiced expression of fake remorse I'd seen 1,000 times before. He pulled his hands from his pockets and spread them wide in a gesture that was supposed to look apologetic, but just made him appear more guilty. "Nat, hey, I was hoping we could talk," he called out, his voice carrying that artificially casual tone he always used when he was trying to minimize something terrible he'd done. "Look, I know you're probably wondering about your car. Wondering about my car. As if I'd simply misplaced it somewhere, and couldn't remember where I'd parked it. As if federal agents hadn't just spent 3 hours questioning me about surveillance equipment and national security breaches." The casual way he said it made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. Agent Wong's warning echoed in my mind about not confronting him directly, but I needed to know how much damage he'd really caused. "Where is it, Kyle?" I asked, stopping a few feet away from him. Close enough to see the nervous sweat beading on his forehead, despite the relatively cool morning air, far enough away that I wouldn't be tempted to shake him until his teeth rattled. "That's what I wanted to talk about. See, the thing is." He ran a hand through his unwashed hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "I kind of had to sell it, but I can explain everything, I swear." Had to sell it, like it was some sort of emergency, some life-or-death situation that justified stealing from his own sister. I crossed my arms and waited, knowing that Kyle's explanations were usually more revealing than he intended them to be. "You know how things have been rough lately, right? Since I lost the construction job, and Rachel moved out, and I had to move back in with Mom and Dad." He was pacing now, a short nervous loop that took him 3 steps in each direction. "I've been applying for jobs. I really have, but nobody's hiring right now, and I had some debts that were getting pretty serious." "What kind of debts?" Kyle's eyes flickered away from mine, focusing on something over my shoulder. "Just some credit card stuff, you know. And I might have borrowed some money from Tony Melissa's brother, and he was getting impatient about getting paid back." Tony Melissa. I knew that name from my childhood, remembered him as one of the neighborhood kids who'd grown up to run with a rough crowd. The kind of person who loaned money at interest rates that would make payday lenders blush, the kind of person who collected debts with methods that left bruises. "How much do you owe him?" "It's not important," Kyle said quickly, which meant it was probably a lot more than the $8,000 he'd gotten from my car. "The point is, I saw your Honda just sitting there in your parking garage, and you never drive it anywhere, and I thought, you take the bus everywhere anyway. Right? So I figured you wouldn't even notice it was gone for a while. Wouldn't notice it was gone. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He'd stolen federal surveillance equipment, compromised a national security operation, and potentially destroyed my career, all because he thought I was too pathetic to notice my own car missing. So you just took it, I said, keeping my voice level. Without asking, without telling me. I was going to tell you. Kyle protested, his voice rising slightly. I was going to pay you back as soon as I found a job. I even got a good price for it, $8,000, which is more than I thought it was worth. It's a 2019, but it's got some miles on it, and the interior's kind of basic. $8,000. For a car that was worth twice that, equipped with surveillance technology that cost more than Kyle made in a year. The irony would have been funny, if it weren't so catastrophically devastating. Where did you sell it? This place on Camelback Road, Thompson's Auto Sales. The guy seemed really honest, you know. He gave me a fair price, without trying to lowball me or anything. Kyle's expression brightened slightly, as if he expected praise for his shrewd negotiating skills. I figured you'd be okay with it once you heard how much I got. It's not like you really needed the car anyway. There it was again, that casual dismissal of my life and my needs. In Kyle's mind, I was still the same little sister who'd never amounted to anything, whose possessions were fair game, because she obviously didn't deserve them anyway. The fact that he genuinely seemed to believe he'd done me a favor made my hands shake with suppressed rage. Kyle, did you go through the car before you sold it? What do you mean? Did you look in the glove compartment, under the seats, in the trunk? Did you check to see if there was anything important in there? Kyle's face went blank for a moment, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head, as he tried to figure out if this was a trick question. I grabbed the registration and insurance stuff, obviously. And there were some papers in the glove box that looked like work stuff, but nothing important, just boring office documents. Work stuff. Boring office documents. If only he knew that those boring documents contained encrypted files that could expose an international smuggling ring, that the papers he'd dismissed so casually were worth millions to the right buyers, and could get people killed in the wrong hands. What did you do with the papers? I left them in the car. The dealer said he'd clean it out before putting it on the lot. Kyle shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly growing uncomfortable with the direction of my questions. Why was there something important? I thought it was just like insurance forms and maintenance records. Insurance forms and maintenance records. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Kyle had just handed over 2 years of undercover intelligence work to a used car dealer, and he thought it was paperwork about oil changes. Kyle, I need you to think very carefully about this. Did anyone else know you were planning to sell my car? No, why would they? He looked genuinely confused by the question. It's not like it's a big deal. People sell cars all the time. Did you tell anyone you were having money problems? Anyone who might have suggested selling the car as a solution? I talked to Mom and Dad about needing to find work, and Rachel knew things were tight before she moved out, but Kyle paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Why are you asking me all these weird questions? It's like you think I'm some kind of criminal or something. The innocent bewilderment in his voice was almost convincing, but I'd spent 2 years learning to read people, learning to spot deception and hidden motives. Kyle wasn't lying about his ignorance regarding the car's real contents, but there was something else there, something he wasn't telling me. I'm just trying to understand what happened, I said carefully. The car meant more to me than you realized. Look, I know you're mad, and I get it, okay. I should have asked first. But it's not like I stole it or anything. We're family. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine, right? That's how it's always been. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. The casual entitlement of it took my breath away. In Kyle's world, my success, my possessions, my entire life existed for his benefit. He genuinely couldn't understand why I'd be upset about him taking something that belonged to me, because in his mind, nothing really belonged to me anyway. That's not how it works, Kyle. That's not how any of this works. Come on, don't be dramatic. It's not like you can't afford another car. You've got that job at the tech company, right? You're making decent money now. Decent money. If only he knew that my real salary was more than our father had made in his best year, that the boring office job he loved to mock was actually one of the most dangerous and important positions a person could hold. If only he knew that while he'd been struggling to make rent on a one-bedroom apartment, I'd been living in a studio by choice, maintaining a cover identity that required me to appear unsuccessful. The job doesn't pay as much as you think. I lied smoothly, and I needed that car for work. Nat, you take the bus to work every day. I've seen you waiting at the stop on Roosevelt Street like every morning, because that was part of my cover, you idiot, I thought but didn't say. Because I needed my family to think I was barely scraping by, needed them to see me as the struggling sister who couldn't afford gas money, and had to rely on public transportation. I used it for other things. Errands, appointments, emergencies. Kyle waved a dismissive hand. You can do all that stuff on the bus. Or I could give you rides when I get my truck fixed. The point is, I needed the money more than you needed the car. Needed the money more than I needed the car. The casual way he ranked our respective needs, as if his gambling debts and poor life choices automatically trumped my actual necessities, made something cold and hard settle in my chest. Did it ever occur to you to ask me for help instead of just taking what you wanted? Ask you for help? Kyle's laugh was sharp and bitter. Right, like you've got $8,000 just lying around. No offense, Nat, but you're not exactly rolling in cash yourself. I mean, look at this place. He gestured at my apartment complex with its cracked stucco walls and parking lot full of dented cars. You're living in the same kind of dump I was before I had to move back home. The same kind of dump. My carefully chosen cover address, selected specifically because it would support the image of a struggling young professional, dismissed as evidence of my failure to thrive. The irony was so thick I could taste it. You don't know anything about my financial situation. I know you eat ramen for dinner 3 nights a week. I know you shop at thrift stores and clip coupons like some grandmother. I know you haven't bought new clothes in months. Kyle's voice was getting louder now, more defensive. I'm not stupid, Nat. I can see that you're barely getting by just like the rest of us. Barely getting by. While I'd been building a career that required advanced security clearances and specialized training, Kyle had been cataloging the evidence of my supposed poverty, using it to justify his decision to steal from me. Every sacrifice I'd made to maintain my cover had been interpreted as proof that I didn't deserve the things I had. So you decided to help yourself to my car because you thought I couldn't afford to stop you. That's not how I meant it. Kyle's defensive anger was starting to crack, revealing the uncertainty underneath. Look, I know it looks bad, okay? I know I should have talked to you first. But I was in a really tight spot, and I knew you'd just worry and try to talk me out of it. Talk you out of stealing my car. Yeah, Kyle, I probably would have. It's not stealing if we're family, the words burst out of him with surprising vehemence. You always do this, you always make everything sound worse than it is. I borrowed your car and sold it to help with a financial emergency. People do stuff like that for their families all the time. Borrowed. He'd stolen my car, sold it without my knowledge or consent, and compromised a federal investigation, but in his mind he'd borrowed it. The word choice was so absurd it almost made me dizzy. Kyle, taking something that belongs to someone else without their permission is the definition of theft. It doesn't matter if we're related. God, you sound just like Dad. Kyle said with disgust. Everything's always black and white with you people. No understanding of nuance or special circumstances or anything. You people. As if I belonged to some other species, some group of unreasonable individuals who insisted on ridiculous concepts like property rights and consent. The casual way he lumped me in with our father, who'd spent years criticizing my life choices, stung more than it should have. What special circumstances, Kyle? You owed money to a loan shark because you made bad decisions, so you stole from me to fix it. That's not nuance, that's just selfishness. I didn't steal anything. Kyle's voice cracked slightly, the way it used to when we were kids and he was getting cornered in a lie. I took something that was just sitting there unused and turned it into money that could actually help someone. If anything, I did you a favor by getting rid of something you didn't need. Did me a favor. By destroying my career and exposing a federal operation, he'd done me a favor. The breathtaking arrogance of it left me momentarily speechless. You had no right to make that decision for me. Right, because you're so good at making decisions for yourself. Kyle shot back. Look where all your great decision-making has gotten you. 26 years old, living alone in a crappy apartment, taking the bus to some dead-end office job that barely pays your bills. At least when I make mistakes, I'm trying to fix them instead of just accepting that my life sucks. My life sucks. According to Kyle, my carefully constructed cover identity was evidence that I was a failure as a human being. The fact that I appeared to be struggling was proof that I deserved to have my possessions taken away and redistributed to more worthy recipients like himself. My life doesn't suck, Kyle, really, because from where I'm standing, it kind of looks like it does. He crossed his arms, apparently deciding that offense was the best defense. When's the last time you went on a date? When's the last time you bought something nice for yourself? When's the last time you did anything fun or exciting or spontaneous? The questions hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. The truth was I couldn't remember the last time I'd done any of those things, but not because I couldn't afford them. I'd been so deep undercover for so long that I'd almost forgotten what my real life looked like, what I actually enjoyed doing when I wasn't pretending to be someone else. That's not the point. It is the point, though. You're wasting your life, Nat. You're 26 years old and you're living like some elderly shut-in who's given up on everything. At least I'm still fighting, still trying to make something happen. Fighting. Kyle's definition of fighting apparently involved stealing from family members and borrowing money from dangerous people to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Meanwhile, my actual fighting, the kind that involved real risk and real sacrifice in service of something bigger than myself, was invisible to him because it didn't fit his narrative of who I was supposed to be. You call getting into debt with loan sharks fighting? I call refusing to settle for mediocrity fighting, Kyle said with the kind of passionate conviction that only people who'd never actually had to fight for anything could muster. I call taking risks and going after what you want fighting. You wouldn't understand. Wouldn't understand. The condescension in his voice made my vision blur with rage. Kyle, who'd never held a job for more than 18 months, who'd never lived more than 20 miles from the house where he'd grown up, who'd never taken a risk more dangerous than betting on football games, was lecturing me about fighting and taking risk. You're right, I said quietly. I wouldn't understand borrowing money I couldn't pay back and then stealing from my family to cover my debts. That kind of fighting is completely foreign to me. Kyle's face flushed red. You know what, I don't have to stand here and listen to you judge me. I came here to be honest with you, to tell you what happened and work out a way to make it right. But if you're just going to be bitter and sarcastic about everything, then forget it. Make it right. As if there were some simple way to undo the damage he'd caused, some easy path back to the way things were before he decided to blow up my entire life for $8,000. How exactly were you planning to make it right, Kyle? I told you I'm going to pay you back as soon as I find work. And in the meantime, like I said, I can give you rides when you need them. Pay me back. With what money? And when exactly was this magical job going to materialize? Kyle had been unemployed for 3 months and hadn't managed to find anything yet, despite the allegedly robust job market he kept talking about. When do you think that might be? Soon. I've got some leads, some interviews lined up. There's this construction company that's supposed to be hiring next month, and my buddy Derek thinks he can get me on with the crew that's working on that new shopping center out in Scottsdale. Supposed to be hiring next month. His buddy Derek thinks he can get him on. Nothing concrete, nothing definite, just the same vague optimism that had been sustaining Kyle's irresponsible lifestyle for years. So you sold my car based on the assumption that you'd be able to pay me back with money from a job you don't have yet. It's not an assumption, it's a plan. There's a difference. Is there? Kyle's jaw tightened. You know what your problem is, Nat? You've given up. You've decided that nothing good is ever going to happen to you, so you don't even try anymore. You just accept whatever scraps life throws at you and act like that's some kind of virtue. Given up. In Kyle's world, maintaining a low profile for professional reasons was the same as giving up on life. Choosing to live modestly in service of a larger goal was evidence of moral failure. The fact that I wasn't constantly grasping for more, better, bigger things meant I'd stopped fighting. And your plan is to take what you want from other people until something good happens to you? My plan is to not let circumstances define me. My plan is to keep pushing until I break through to something better. Kyle was warming to his theme now, his voice taking on the evangelical fervor of someone who'd confused selfishness with ambition. You could learn something from that attitude. Learn something from his attitude. The attitude that had gotten him fired from 3 jobs in 2 years, that had driven away his girlfriend, that had left him $30,000 in debt to dangerous people and living in his childhood bedroom at age 28. I could learn something about entitlement maybe. There's that word again. You know, not everything is about entitlement, Nat. Sometimes it's about survival. Sometimes you have to do things that aren't ideal because the alternative is worse. Survival. Kyle was framing his theft as a matter of life and death, as if he'd been forced to choose between stealing my car and starving in the street. The melodrama of it would have been amusing if it weren't so insulting. What was the alternative, Kyle? What terrible thing would have happened if you'd left my car alone and found another way to deal with your problems? You don't understand the kind of pressure I was under. Tony's brother, he's not the kind of guy you want to owe money to. He made it very clear that he expected payment by the end of the week, and he wasn't interested in hearing excuses. So there it was, the real truth behind Kyle's grand narrative about fighting and refusing to settle. He'd stolen from me because he was scared, because he'd gotten in over his head and needed a quick solution that didn't require any actual effort or sacrifice on his part. How much do you owe him? Kyle's eyes slid away from mine again. That's not really the point. It is if you used my car to pay a debt that's going to keep growing while you're looking for imaginary jobs. The jobs aren't imaginary. Kyle snapped. And the debt is under control now. I paid him what I owed, plus interest. The whole thing is settled. With $8,000. Most of it, yeah. Most of it. Which meant there was still money left over, money that Kyle was probably planning to use for his own expenses while he waited for his next opportunity to present itself. Money that had come from stealing my car and destroying my career. Where's the rest of the money, Kyle? What rest of the money? You said you paid Tony's brother most of the $8,000. Where's what's left? Kyle shifted uncomfortably, his hands going back to his pockets. I had some other expenses. You know, gas money, food, stuff like that. And I wanted to make sure I had something left over in case another emergency came up. Another emergency. Like the last emergency that had been entirely of his own making. Kyle was already planning for his next crisis, already setting aside money stolen from me to fund his next round of poor decisions. So you've got my car money in your pocket right now. It's not your car money, it's emergency money, and it's not very much, maybe a few $100s. A few $100s that rightfully belonged to me, sitting in Kyle's pocket while he lectured me about giving up and accepting mediocrity. The casual way he dismissed my claim to money that had come from selling my property made my hands clench into fists. Give it to me. What? The money, whatever's left from selling my car. Give it to me right now. Kyle's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, indignation, calculation, and finally stubborn refusal. I can't do that, Nat. I told you it's for emergencies. Your emergencies are not my responsibility. Neither are mine yours, but family helps family. That's what family does. Family helps family, but apparently only in one direction. Kyle could take whatever he wanted from me because we were related, but when I asked for the return of my own money, suddenly family obligations didn't apply. Family doesn't steal from family. And family doesn't abandon family when they're in trouble. Abandon. As if I'd ever abandoned Kyle, as if I hadn't spent years listening to his problems and offering advice he never took, and support he never appreciated. As if the fact that I hadn't handed over my possessions for his use constituted some kind of betrayal. We stood there staring at each other across the parking lot. Two people who'd grown up in the same house but might as well have been from different planets. Kyle saw me as a failure who'd given up on life, someone whose modest success didn't count because it wasn't flashy or obvious. I saw him as a perpetual child who'd never learned that actions have consequences, who expected the world to rearrange itself around his needs and desires. The funny thing was, we were both wrong about each other. But only one of us was about to find out just how wrong we'd been. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot just as Kyle was opening his mouth to deliver what I was sure would be another lecture about family loyalty and personal responsibility. The vehicle moved with the kind of deliberate precision that immediately caught my attention, its tinted windows and government plates triggering every instinct I'd developed over 2 years of undercover work. Kyle noticed my sudden shift in focus and turned to follow my gaze. "Friend of yours?" he asked with that smirk he always wore when he thought he'd caught me in some kind of pretension. Something like that, I murmured, watching as Agent Wong stepped out of the driver's seat, followed by a tall man in a dark suit I didn't recognize. They moved across the parking lot with the measured stride of federal agents conducting official business, their eyes scanning the area with professional thoroughness. Natalie Rodriguez. Agent Wong called out as they approached, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Kyle's smirk faltered slightly. How does she know your full name? I ignored him, stepping forward to meet the agents halfway. Agent Wong, I wasn't expecting to see you again so soon. We need to speak with your brother, she said, her gaze shifting to Kyle with the kind of clinical assessment that made most people extremely uncomfortable. Kyle Rodriguez, I presume. Kyle's face had gone pale, but he managed to nod. Yeah, that's me. What's this about? The second agent stepped forward, pulling out a badge wallet and flipping it open with practiced efficiency. Agent David Park, Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to ask you some questions about a vehicle sale you conducted yesterday. Vehicle sale? Kyle's voice cracked slightly, and I could see him trying to process what was happening. You mean Nat's car? What does the FBI want with a used Honda? Agent Park and Agent Wong exchanged a look that spoke volumes about Kyle's naivety. Rodriguez, were you aware that the vehicle you sold contained federal surveillance equipment? Kyle's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Federal what? I don't, that's impossible. It was just a regular car. A 2019 Honda Civic. There wasn't anything special about it. I'm afraid there was quite a lot special about it. Agent Wong said dryly. The vehicle was equipped with approximately $200,000 worth of surveillance technology, along with encrypted hard drives containing classified information. 200,000. Kyle's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he stumbled backward until he was leaning against his pickup truck. That's not possible. The car was only worth maybe 15 grand, tops. The car itself, perhaps. Agent Park agreed. But the equipment installed in it was worth considerably more. Equipment that is now in the possession of a civilian car dealer who has no security clearance and no authority to handle classified materials. Kyle's eyes darted between the agents and me, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first dawning awareness that he might have stepped into something much bigger than a simple family dispute. Natalie, what's going on? Why would your car have government equipment in it? This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The moment when Kyle's carefully constructed worldview, where he was the ambitious one and I was the failure, would come crashing down around him. The moment when he'd finally understand exactly what he'd stolen from me. Because it wasn't just my car, Kyle. It was my work vehicle. Your work vehicle. Kyle laughed, but it was a hollow sound with no humor in it. You're a data analyst at some tech company. Why would a data analyst need surveillance equipment? Agent Wong stepped in smoothly. Mr. Rodriguez, your sister is a contractor for the Department of Defense. She's been working undercover for the past 2 years on a classified operation involving international arms trafficking. The color drained completely from Kyle's face. That's impossible. She works at Meridian Technologies. She's a data analyst, she makes barely enough to afford that crappy apartment. The position at Meridian Technologies is her cover identity. Agent Park explained with the patience of someone who delivered this kind of news before. Rodriguez is actually one of our most valuable intelligence assets. The crappy apartment and modest lifestyle are part of an elaborate deception designed to hide her real work from potential threats. Kyle turned to stare at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't quite horror, wasn't quite awe, but something that combined elements of both with a healthy dose of dawning comprehension about just how badly he'd miscalculated. You're a spy, he said weakly. I'm an intelligence contractor, I corrected. There's a difference. But you take the bus to work every day. You eat ramen for dinner. You shop at thrift stores. Because that's what my cover identity would do. Sarah Thompson, struggling data analyst, can't afford a car or expensive food or designer clothes. But Natalie Rodriguez, defense contractor, makes more in a month than you've made in the past year. Kyle's mouth was working soundlessly, like he was trying to form words but couldn't quite manage it. Finally he found his voice. How much more? Agent Wong consulted a tablet she'd pulled from her briefcase. Miss Rodriguez's annual salary, including performance bonuses and hazard pay, is approximately $420,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Kyle's face went through several more color changes before settling on a sickly green that suggested he might be about to vomit. 400, he couldn't even finish the sentence. Plus benefits, housing allowances and equipment stipends. Agent Park added helpfully. Rodriguez is also entitled to federal pension benefits and has accumulated substantial hazard pay during her overseas assignments. Overseas assignments. Kyle's voice was barely a whisper now. I spent 6 months in Eastern Europe last year, I said quietly. You thought I was visiting college friends in Denver. And 3 months in Southeast Asia the year before. Agent Wong added, reading from her tablet. Your family was told she was attending a professional development conference. Kyle slid down the side of his truck until he was sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. This isn't real. This can't be real. It's very real, Mr. Rodriguez, Agent Park said. And the situation you've created by selling your sister's vehicle is extremely serious. The classified materials in that car could compromise ongoing operations and endanger the lives of intelligence assets around the world. But I didn't know, Kyle protested, looking up with desperate eyes. I swear to God I had no idea there was anything like that in the car. I thought it was just a regular Honda. Ignorance isn't a defense when it comes to national security, Agent Wong informed him. The fact remains that you took possession of federal property without authorization and transferred it to a civilian. I didn't take possession of federal property. I sold my sister's car. Kyle's voice was getting higher, more frantic. It was registered in her name. I thought it belonged to her. It did belong to me, I said, but it was also equipped for my work, which you would have known if you'd bothered to ask me before stealing it. I didn't steal it. Kyle's old defensiveness was reasserting itself, though it sounded hollow now. We're family. I borrowed it. Agent Park's expression suggested he'd heard this particular rationalization before and found it singularly unimpressive. Rodriguez, taking someone else's property without their knowledge or consent is theft, regardless of your relationship to the owner. The fact that the property in question contained classified government equipment elevates this from a simple family dispute to a federal crime. Federal crime? Kyle scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. You can't be serious. I sold a car. People sell cars every day. People don't usually sell cars containing military-grade surveillance equipment and classified intelligence files, Agent Wong pointed out. The penalty for unauthorized disclosure of classified materials can be up to 20 years in federal prison. Kyle's legs gave out again, and he slumped back against his truck. 20 years. For selling a car I didn't know was special. The law doesn't recognize I didn't know as a valid defense, Agent Park explained. Especially when the lack of knowledge stems from criminal behavior. What criminal behavior? Kyle demanded, though his voice lacked conviction. Theft, I said simply. You stole my car, Kyle. Everything that happened after that is a consequence of that original crime. Kyle stared at me with an expression of complete bewilderment, as if I were speaking a foreign language. But you're my sister. You're supposed to help me when I'm in trouble. I am helping you, I replied. I'm cooperating fully with the federal investigation, which is more than you deserve after what you've done. Miss Rodriguez has been extremely helpful, Agent Wong confirmed. Her cooperation is the only reason we're treating this as a family matter that got out of hand rather than a potential espionage case. Espionage. Kyle's voice cracked on the word. You think I'm a spy? We think you're an idiot, Agent Park said bluntly. But we have to investigate all possibilities when classified materials are compromised. Kyle flinched as if he'd been slapped. I'm not an idiot. I just needed money and the car was sitting there unused. The car wasn't unused, I said, my patience finally beginning to fray. I used it for work almost every day. I just made sure you never saw me using it because maintaining my cover was more important than proving to you that I wasn't the failure you thought I was. But why didn't you tell me? Kyle's voice was plaintive now, almost childlike. Why didn't you tell any of us what you really did for a living? Because my life depends on maintaining my cover, I snapped. Because the people I investigate would kill me if they knew who I really was. Because loose lips sink ships and you've never been able to keep a secret in your entire life. Kyle's face crumpled at that, and for a moment he looked exactly like he had when we were children and I'd caught him breaking one of my toys. I can keep secrets. Really? Like the way you kept it secret that you were planning to steal my car. I wasn't planning to steal it. It was an opportunity. An opportunity to commit a federal crime. Agent Wong stepped forward, apparently deciding that our family therapy session had gone on long enough. Mr. Rodriguez, we need you to come with us for formal questioning. You have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to an attorney. You're arresting me. Kyle's voice shot up an octave. We're bringing you in for questioning, Agent Park clarified. Whether charges are filed will depend on the results of our investigation and your level of cooperation. Kyle looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route or someone to rescue him. His gaze landed on me with something that might have been hope. Nat, you have to help me. Tell them it was just a misunderstanding. Tell them I didn't mean any harm. I looked at my little brother, sitting crumpled against his beat-up truck, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Part of me, the part that remembered teaching him to ride a bike and helping him with his homework, wanted to comfort him. But a larger part, the part that had spent 2 years building a case that could now be compromised, felt nothing but cold fury. You stole from me, Kyle. You sold government property to a stranger. You compromised a federal investigation that could have saved lives. I paused, letting the weight of his actions settle on him. And you did it all because you thought I was too much of a loser to notice or care. I never said you were a loser. You didn't have to say it. You've been showing me what you think of me for years. I crossed my arms, feeling a strange sense of liberation in finally being able to speak honestly. Every comment about my apartment, my job, my lifestyle. Every lecture about ambition and success. Every time you treated my possessions like they were community property because clearly I didn't deserve them anyway. Kyle's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I was trying to motivate you. I thought you were wasting your potential. My potential. I almost laughed at the irony. Kyle, while you were lecturing me about wasting my potential, I was building a career that requires security clearances you couldn't even apply for. While you were criticizing my lack of ambition, I was conducting operations in countries you've never heard of. While you were making jokes about my boring office job, I was gathering intelligence that has already prevented 2 terrorist attacks and shut down a major weapons trafficking network. Each revelation hit Kyle like a physical blow. His face kept changing expression as he tried to process information that completely contradicted everything he thought he knew about his older sister. 2 terrorist attacks, he whispered. That I can tell you about, I said. There are others that remain classified. Agent Wong checked her watch with the impatience of someone who had more important things to do than referee family drama. Mr. Rodriguez, we really need to get moving. Time is a factor in this investigation. Kyle struggled to his feet, his movements clumsy and uncertain. What's going to happen to me? That depends on you, Agent Park said. If you cooperate fully and we determine that this was simply a case of extremely poor judgment rather than malicious intent, you might be looking at probation and community service. And if you don't cooperate, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Then Mr. Rodriguez will likely be facing federal charges for theft of government property, unauthorized disclosure of classified materials, and obstruction of justice. Agent Wong's tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the potential destruction of Kyle's entire future. Kyle swayed on his feet, and for a moment I thought he might faint. I want to cooperate. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Good, Agent Park said. Let's start with a detailed account of everyone you spoke to about your financial problems and your sister's car. As the agents escorted Kyle toward their SUV, he kept looking back at me with an expression of desperate confusion, as if he still couldn't quite believe that his boring, unsuccessful sister had turned out to be someone he'd never imagined. Nat, he called out just before they reached the vehicle. I'm sorry, I really am. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stood there in the parking lot, watching my little brother being placed in the back of a federal vehicle, and tried to feel something other than grim satisfaction. He was sorry now, but only because he'd been caught, only because the consequences had finally caught up with him. If the FBI hadn't gotten involved, if Marcus Thompson hadn't discovered the surveillance equipment, Kyle would have been perfectly happy to let me believe my car had been stolen by strangers. As the SUV pulled out of the parking lot, I realized that this was probably the last time I'd see Kyle as a free man for a while. Depending on how the investigation went, he could be facing years in federal prison. Our parents would be devastated. Our family would never be the same. And the strangest part was, I felt no guilt about any of it. Kyle had made his choices, and now he was going to live with the consequences. For the first time in years, someone in my family was going to be held accountable for their actions instead of being bailed out by someone else's sacrifice. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Agent Wong. Report to the federal building at 9 a.m. tomorrow for debriefing. Bring all case files from your apartment. Operation may be salvageable if we move quickly. Operation may be salvageable. 2 years of my life, hanging in the balance because my brother had wanted beer money. I looked up at my apartment building, at the carefully maintained facade of modest failure that had protected me for so long, and wondered if I'd ever be able to go back to pretending to be someone I wasn't. The irony was perfect in its cruelty. Kyle had spent years trying to motivate me to be more successful, to stop accepting mediocrity, to fight for something better. He'd finally gotten his wish. I was about to stop hiding my success, stop pretending to be ordinary, stop letting my family think I was anything less than extraordinary. He just hadn't realized that the revelation would destroy him in the process. The federal building's conference room felt different this time. Where yesterday's meeting had been about damage assessment and crisis management, today's gathering had the atmosphere of a war council. Agent Wong sat at the head of the polished table, surrounded by files, laptops, and enough coffee cups to suggest she'd been here most of the night. Across from her, Agent Park was reviewing what looked like surveillance photos, while a woman I didn't recognize was typing rapidly on a tablet. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for coming in early," Agent Wong said as I took a seat. "I'd like you to meet Deputy Director Sarah Chen from the Department of Defense. She's been briefed on your situation." Deputy Director Chen looked up from her tablet with the kind of sharp intelligence that made it clear she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Rodriguez, I've been reviewing your file. Your work on the Meridian investigation has been exemplary. It would be a significant loss to abandon the operation now. Is that still possible?" I asked, setting down my own coffee and trying to process the implication that my career might not be completely destroyed after all. I assumed that once the surveillance equipment was discovered, the entire operation would be compromised. "Not necessarily," Agent Park said, looking up from his photos. "Your brother's interview last night was quite illuminating. It appears his theft was entirely opportunistic, with no connection to your investigation targets." Agent Wong pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. Kyle Rodriguez was extensively questioned about his financial difficulties, his associates, and his knowledge of your work. He passed 2 polygraph tests confirming that he had no awareness of your real job and no contact with anyone connected to your investigation. 2 polygraph tests, we wanted to be absolutely certain. Deputy Director Chen explained. The integrity of your operation depends on confirming that this was simple theft rather than enemy action. Your brother's answers were consistent across both tests. He genuinely believed you were an unsuccessful data analyst, living paycheck to paycheck. The relief I felt was tempered by a familiar sting of irritation. Even under federal interrogation, Kyle's perception of me as a failure had remained unshakable enough to pass lie detector tests. His dismissive attitude toward my supposed life had actually become evidence in my favor. "What did he tell you about his decision to sell the car?" Agent Park consulted his notes. He described weeks of increasing financial pressure from creditors, including threats from an individual he identified as Rico Melissa. He stated that he'd been considering asking family members for loans, but was embarrassed by his situation. "Rico Melissa," I repeated, recognizing the name. "Tony Melissa's brother. They run a small-time loan operation out of a auto repair shop on the west side. We're familiar with their business." Deputy Director Chen said dryly. "Your brother owes them significantly more than the $8,000 he obtained from your car. The partial payment apparently bought him another month before they expect the remaining balance." "How much does he still owe?" "Approximately $15,000. Agent Wong answered. "Plus accumulating interest at what can only be described as predatory rates." The numbers painted a clearer picture of Kyle's desperation than his defensive explanations had. He wasn't just financially irresponsible, he was drowning in debt to people who collected payments through intimidation and violence. The realization didn't excuse his theft, but it explained the panicked decision-making that had led him to see my car as a solution rather than considering the consequences. His timeline confirms that the theft was impulsive. Agent Park continued. He made the decision to take your vehicle on Tuesday morning, after receiving what he described as a final warnings from Rico Melissa the night before. He drove directly to Thompson's Auto Sales and completed the transaction within 2 hours. No advance planning, no surveillance of your routines, no attempts to determine the vehicle's contents or value beyond a superficial assessment, Deputy Director Chen added. Every aspect of his behavior confirms opportunistic theft rather than targeted intelligence gathering. Agent Wong leaned forward, her expression becoming more focused. Which brings us to the current situation. The equipment has been recovered intact. The encrypted drives were never accessed, and your cover identity remains viable. We believe the operation can continue. Continue how? I asked, though part of me was already anticipating the answer. My family knows the truth now. Kyle knows I'm not really a struggling data analyst. Your immediate family knows. Agent Wong corrected. But your investigation targets don't. As far as Victor Petrov and his associates are concerned, you're still Sarah Thompson, the financially desperate Meridian Technologies employee who's been slowly providing them with information in exchange for money. Victor Petrov. Just hearing the name made my shoulders tense. For 18 months, I'd been carefully building a relationship with the Ukrainian arms dealer who'd been using his legitimate shipping business to move stolen military technology out of the country. The persona of Sarah Thompson, a data analyst with access to shipping manifests and payment records, had been perfectly calibrated to appeal to his recruitment methods. Petrov's scheduled to make contact this week about the next shipment. I said, remembering the encrypted message I'd received just before Kyle's theft had turned my world upside down. He's expecting intelligence about the new defense contracts Meridian is processing, which you can still provide. Deputy Director Chen said. Your access to Meridian's systems hasn't been compromised, and Petrov has no reason to suspect that anything has changed. Agent Park spread out a series of surveillance photos showing a middle-aged man with silver hair and expensive suits. Petrov's getting more confident, taking bigger risks. Our analysts believe he's preparing for a major operation, something that could net his organization millions in stolen technology. The shipping manifests you've been feeding him have convinced him that Meridian is the perfect target, Agent Wong added. Canceling the operation now would mean losing our best chance to catch him in the act. I studied the photos, remembering the carefully orchestrated meetings where I'd played the role of a struggling employee willing to sell information for desperately needed cash. Petrov had been patient, methodical, slowly increasing my supposed access to more sensitive information while keeping me emotionally invested through a combination of money and manufactured sympathy for my financial struggles. What about my family situation? How do I explain Kyle's arrest to my parents without compromising the operation? Kyle hasn't been arrested. Deputy Director Chen clarified. He's been released on his own recognizance pending the completion of our investigation. As far as your parents know, he sold your car without permission and got caught up in a federal investigation because the buyer reported some suspicious equipment. Suspicious equipment, a cover story. Agent Wong explained. We've told the family that your car was equipped with an experimental GPS tracking system that triggered federal monitoring protocols when it changed ownership. Concerning but not necessarily indicative of covert operations. The elegance of the deception was impressive. It explained the FBI's involvement and Kyle's legal troubles without revealing the true nature of my work. My parents would see it as bureaucratic overreach rather than evidence that their daughter was living a double life. Kyle's agreed to maintain this cover story in exchange for a plea agreement. Agent Park added. He'll plead guilty to theft charges in state court and serve 6 months of community service. The federal charges will be dropped if he cooperates fully and maintains operational security. Operational security. I repeated with a bitter laugh. Kyle couldn't keep a surprise party secret, and now he's responsible for operational security on a federal investigation. People can be surprisingly motivated when they're facing 20 years in federal prison. Deputy Director Chen observed. Your brother seems to understand that his future depends on keeping quiet about your real job. Agent Wong pulled out another folder. This one marked with security classifications that made my pulse quicken. The question now is whether you're prepared to continue the operation, knowing that your family situation has fundamentally changed. It was a fair question. Yesterday morning, I'd been successfully maintaining two completely separate identities. Sarah Thompson, the struggling data analyst, existed in one world, while Natalie Rodriguez, the defense contractor, existed in another. Kyle's theft had shattered that separation, forcing me to confront the fact that my real life and my cover life could no longer be kept completely apart. Petrov's meeting is scheduled for Thursday, I said slowly, thinking through the implications. He's expecting information about the new shipment schedules, which we've prepared. Agent Park confirmed. Carefully crafted intelligence that will seem valuable while actually leading him into a trap. And if something goes wrong, if Petrov suspects that I'm not who I claim to be, Deputy Director Chen's expression became grimly serious. Then you'll be extracted immediately. But our assessment is that the risk remains manageable. Your cover identity has been thoroughly established over 18 months of careful cultivation. Nothing about Kyle's situation changes Petrov's perception of Sarah Thompson. Agent Wong leaned back in her chair, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to read my thoughts. The decision is yours, Miss Rodriguez. We can extract you now and attempt to salvage what intelligence we've gathered, or you can continue the operation and potentially deliver a major victory against international arms trafficking. The choice was mine, but it didn't feel like much of a choice. 2 years of my life had been invested in building this case. Hundreds of hours of careful relationship building with targets who trusted Sarah Thompson enough to involve her in their criminal activities. The opportunity to take down an entire network of arms dealers who were selling American military technology to hostile foreign governments. What happens to Kyle if I continue the operation? He fulfills his community service obligations and stays out of federal prison. Agent Park answered. He'll also be monitored to ensure he doesn't compromise your cover, but as long as he follows the conditions of his plea agreement, he'll be free to rebuild his life. And if I withdraw from the operation? Kyle still faces the same charges, but his cooperation becomes less valuable. Deputy Director Chen explained. The plea agreement might be less favorable if we can't demonstrate that his information contributed to a successful conclusion of the investigation. So Kyle's future was tied to my decision to continue risking my life in pursuit of criminals who would kill me without hesitation if they discovered my real identity. The irony was almost poetic. My brother, who'd spent years dismissing my choices and lecturing me about success, now depended entirely on my professional competence for his freedom. I need to know something, I said, looking directly at Agent Wong. Yesterday you said the surveillance equipment was worth $200,000. Kyle sold the car for $8,000. What happened to the difference? Agent Wong smiled grimly. Marcus Thompson is a legitimate businessman who had no idea what he was purchasing. When we explained the situation, he immediately agreed to return the vehicle and its contents without compensation. So Kyle essentially stole $200,000 worth of government property and sold it for $8,000 to pay off loan sharks. That's an accurate summary, Deputy Director Chen confirmed. Though I suspect your brother still doesn't fully comprehend the value of what he disposed of. Agent Park pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of Kyle taken during his interview the previous night. He looked haggard and confused, like someone who'd walked through a door expecting to find a bathroom and instead discovered himself in the middle of a federal investigation. He asked repeatedly if he could make this right by paying back the money. Agent Park said. When we explained that the equipment was worth more than he'd earn in a decade, he just stared at us. Did you tell him how much I actually make? We did, Agent Wong confirmed. His response was, quote, "That's impossible. She eats ramen noodles and takes the bus everywhere." Even faced with official federal documents confirming my salary and security clearance, Kyle's image of me as an unsuccessful loser had been so deeply ingrained that he'd initially refused to believe it. The agents had apparently needed to show him tax documents and security clearance paperwork before he'd accepted that his boring sister was actually earning more than our father had made at the peak of his career. What's his attitude now? Confused, remorseful, and terrified, Deputy Director Chen answered. He seems to understand that he's completely misjudged your situation, but he's having difficulty processing the reality of what you actually do for a living. Agent Wong leaned forward again. He asked if he could speak with you. We told him that would depend on your decision about continuing the operation. The idea of facing Kyle again, of seeing him struggle to reconcile his preconceptions with reality, held no appeal whatsoever. I'd spent years enduring his condescension and criticism, years of listening to him explain what was wrong with my life and how I could fix it. The revelation that he'd been completely wrong about everything should have felt satisfying, but mostly it just felt exhausting. Not yet, I decided. If I'm continuing the operation, I need to focus on Petrov. Family drama can wait until the case is closed. Understood, Agent Wong said, making a note in her file. We'll inform your brother that communication will be limited until the investigation is complete. Deputy Director Chen checked her watch and began gathering her materials. Miss Rodriguez, if you're committed to continuing, we'll need to conduct a full operational briefing this afternoon. The Petrov meeting is critical, and we want to ensure you're prepared for every contingency. I'm committed, I said, surprised by how certain I felt. Kyle's stupidity isn't going to destroy 2 years of work. Agent Park smiled at that. Your brother's stupidity may have actually strengthened your cover. If Petrov does any background checking, he'll find recent evidence that you're dealing with family financial crises and legal problems. Sarah Thompson's supposed desperation will seem even more authentic. It was true, I realized. Kyle's theft and arrest had created exactly the kind of personal chaos that would make Sarah Thompson more vulnerable to Petrov's recruitment tactics. The Ukrainian arms dealer specialized in targeting people who were financially desperate and emotionally isolated, and my family's situation now provided perfect cover for both conditions. There's one more thing, Agent Wong said as we prepared to adjourn the meeting. Your parents have been asking questions about Kyle's legal situation. How do you want to handle family interactions going forward? The question forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding since Kyle's arrest. My parents still believed I was struggling financially, still saw me as the daughter who'd disappointed them by abandoning the family accounting firm for a dead-end job. They had no idea that their criminal son's victim was actually more successful than they'd ever imagined. I'll maintain my cover with them too, I decided. Sarah Thompson's financial struggles need to seem real, and that means continuing to appear unsuccessful to everyone in my personal life. Even after everything Kyle put you through. Especially after everything Kyle put you through, I corrected. My parents raised him to believe that taking from me was acceptable because I didn't deserve what I had. Revealing my success now would just give them an excuse to minimize what he did. Deputy Director Chen nodded approvingly. Operational discipline. Your family situation is complicated, but you're maintaining focus on the mission objectives. As the meeting concluded and the agents began packing up their materials, I found myself thinking about Kyle sitting in a federal interrogation room, finally being forced to confront the consequences of his actions. For years he'd been insulated from real accountability by family members who made excuses for his behavior and cleaned up his messes. Now he was facing the possibility of federal prison, and no one could bail him out except the sister he'd stolen from. The sister he'd never bothered to really know. Agent Wong paused at the door. Miss Rodriguez, for what it's worth, your brother seemed genuinely remorseful during his interview. He appears to understand that he seriously misjudged your situation. Kyle's always been sorry after he gets caught, I replied. The question is whether he'll actually learn anything from this experience or just find new ways to justify his behavior. I suppose we'll find out, Agent Wong said. In the meantime, you have a Ukrainian arms dealer to catch. As I left the federal building and walked toward the bus stop that would take me back to my carefully maintained cover life, I realized that Thursday's meeting with Petrov would be more than just another step in a long investigation. It would be the moment when I proved that Kyle's theft, his dismissal of my capabilities, and his fundamental misunderstanding of who I was hadn't been enough to destroy what I'd built. It would be the moment when I demonstrated that while Kyle had been busy lecturing me about success and ambition, I'd been quietly becoming exactly the kind of person he claimed to want to be. The irony was perfect. Kyle had always believed he was the ambitious one, the one willing to take risks and fight for what he wanted. But real ambition, the kind that actually accomplished something meaningful, required discipline and sacrifice and the ability to work toward long-term goals without immediate gratification. Kyle had never learned any of those skills. But I had, and Thursday would prove it. The Meridian Technologies building looked exactly the same as it had for the past 18 months, but everything felt different as I badged in Thursday morning. The familiar weight of my fake ID and the practiced slouch of Sarah Thompson's posture couldn't quite mask the hyper-awareness that came with knowing this could be my final day in the role that had defined my life for nearly 2 years. Viktor Petrov was scheduled to meet me in the parking garage at 2:30 p.m., just after the lunch shift change when security cameras would be cycling and foot traffic would be minimal. He'd chosen the location himself, as he always did, maintaining the illusion that he was the one in control of our arrangement. What he didn't know was that every meeting had been orchestrated by federal agents, every piece of information I'd provided carefully crafted to lead him deeper into a trap that was finally ready to spring. I made my way to my cubicle in the data analysis department, settling into the uncomfortable chair that Sarah Thompson had occupied for what felt like a lifetime. Around me, my supposed co-workers were beginning their day, completely unaware that the unremarkable woman in discount clothes was actually a federal contractor preparing to conclude one of the most significant arms trafficking investigations in recent memory. My computer terminal flickered to life, displaying the same mundane spreadsheets and shipping manifests that had provided perfect cover for my real work. Today's data was different, though. Hidden among the legitimate cargo information were the details that would convince Petrov to commit to his largest illegal operation yet, a shipment of advanced radar components that would actually lead him directly into federal custody. At 10:15, my personal phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Kyle says he can't talk to you until his legal situation is resolved. What kind of trouble is he in? Your father is worried sick." I stared at the message for several minutes, considering my response. My parents still believed Kyle had simply sold my car without permission and somehow gotten tangled up in federal bureaucracy. They had no idea their son had committed multiple felonies or that their daughter was anything other than a struggling office worker caught up in circumstances beyond her control. "Lawyers say it's better if we don't discuss the case," I typed back. "Kyle made some bad decisions and now he has to face the consequences." The response came immediately. "Don't be so harsh, he's your brother. Family should stick together during difficult times. Family should stick together." The phrase that had justified years of Kyle's entitled behavior, that had allowed him to take whatever he wanted from me because blood relations somehow trumped personal boundaries and property rights. Even now, faced with evidence that Kyle had committed serious crimes, my mother's instinct was to protect him from accountability. "He stole my car. Mom. There have to be consequences. He borrowed it. There's a difference." I almost laughed at the persistence of that particular delusion. Even Kyle himself had admitted to theft during his federal interrogation, but my mother was still clinging to the fiction that family relationships somehow transformed criminal behavior into acceptable borrowing. Rather than continue the argument, I put my phone away and focused on the data that would help capture an international arms dealer. At least one member of my family was going to be held accountable for their actions today, even if it wasn't the one who'd actually wronged me. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Every routine task felt surreal, every mundane conversation with coworkers carried the weight of potential finality. If everything went according to plan, this would be Sarah Thompson's last day at Meridian Technologies. After today, I'd either be preparing for a new assignment or dealing with the aftermath of an operation gone catastrophically wrong. At noon, Agent Wong called my personal phone. "Final check. Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I can be," I replied, stepping into an empty conference room for privacy. Petrov confirmed the meeting this morning. He's bringing his technical specialist to review the shipping documentation. Good, that means he's committed to the operation. Remember, once he takes possession of the falsified manifests, we have him on multiple federal charges. And if he suspects something, you abort immediately. Don't try to salvage the situation if things feel wrong. Your safety is more important than the arrest. Agent Wong's concern was touching, but I knew the reality of undercover work. If Petrov suspected I was a federal agent, my safety would depend entirely on how quickly backup could reach the parking garage. Men like Viktor Petrov didn't leave loose ends alive. The backup teams are in position. Positioned and ready. We'll have eyes on you from the moment you enter the garage. After hanging up, I returned to my cubicle and tried to focus on spreadsheets while my mind raced through contingency plans and exit strategies. At 2:15, I gathered the falsified shipping documents, slipped them into a manila envelope, and made my way toward the elevator bank. The parking garage felt different today, shadows seeming deeper and every sound amplified by nervous tension. I found my designated parking spot and leaned against the concrete pillar, checking my watch and trying to project the demeanor of a financially desperate employee about to make another illicit transaction. Petrov's black Mercedes pulled into the garage at exactly 2:30, followed by a second vehicle I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened as I realized he'd brought more people than expected, a deviation from his usual pattern that could indicate either increased confidence or growing suspicion. Viktor Petrov emerged from the Mercedes looking exactly as he had in surveillance photos, silver-haired and expensively dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through a combination of money and intimidation. The man who got out of the second car was younger, darker, with the kind of alertness that suggested military or security training. "Sarah," Petrov said warmly, approaching with the practiced charm that had made him so effective at recruiting assets like the fictional version of me. "You look worried. I hope there haven't been any complications." "No complications," I lied smoothly, falling into Sarah Thompson's slightly nervous cadence. "Just the usual stress of doing something I know I shouldn't be doing." Petrov smiled at that, apparently reassured by my discomfort. "Conscience is a luxury for people who can afford it. You're being practical, nothing more." The younger man positioned himself where he could watch both entrances to the garage, confirming my suspicion that he was security rather than the technical specialist Petrov had mentioned. The change in protocol set off alarm bells in my mind, but I forced myself to continue with the planned script. "I brought the shipping manifests you requested," I said, holding up the manila envelope. "The radar components are scheduled to ship next Tuesday on the Meridian vessel Nordic Star." "Excellent." Petrov's eyes lit up with the anticipation of someone about to make a significant profit. "May I examine the documentation?" This was the moment. Once Petrov took possession of the falsified documents, federal agents would have everything they needed to arrest him for conspiracy to steal military technology. I extended the envelope toward him, watching his face for any sign that he suspected a trap. Petrov opened the envelope and began reviewing the shipping manifests with the thoroughness of someone who'd made a fortune in legitimate business before turning to arms trafficking. His expression remained neutral as he scanned the cargo listings, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been confusion when he reached the second page. "Sarah, these manifests show the radar components being shipped to Hamburg, but our previous discussions indicated they were destined for Rotterdam." My blood turned cold. The federal agents who'd prepared the documents had made an error, a small inconsistency that was about to expose the entire operation. I had seconds to decide whether to try to explain the discrepancy or abort the mission. "There was a last-minute change in routing," I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "The customer requested Hamburg instead of Rotterdam for customs reasons." Petrov studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd survived decades in dangerous business by reading people accurately. "Customs reasons. Something about import duties. I don't really understand the details." I shrugged with what I hoped looked like Sarah Thompson's characteristic lack of curiosity about matters beyond her immediate concern. The security specialist said something in what sounded like Russian too quietly for me to make out the words. Petrov responded in the same language, their conversation brief but clearly significant. When they finished, Petrov looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. "Sarah, in all our previous dealings, you've been remarkably well informed about shipping details. It seems unusual that you wouldn't understand something as basic as customs routing." The operation was falling apart. Petrov's suspicion was clear in his voice, and I could see the security specialist shifting position to block my path toward the garage exit. In seconds they would either leave without completing the transaction, or decide that I represented a threat that needed to be eliminated. "I'm not paid to understand," I said, falling back on Sarah Thompson's established character traits. "I'm paid to provide information. If you don't want it, I can find someone else who does." It was a calculated gamble, playing to Petrov's ego and greed, while reinforcing Sarah's supposed naivety about the larger implications of their arrangement. For a moment his expression remained unreadable, and I wondered if I'd just made the last mistake of my life. Then Petrov smiled, the tension leaving his shoulders as he apparently decided my confusion was genuine rather than suspicious. "Of course, my apologies. You've always been reliable, and I shouldn't question your information based on a minor routing change." He took the documents from the envelope, examining them one final time before folding them and placing them in his jacket pocket. "The payment will be transferred to your account within the hour, as usual." "Thank you," I said, fighting the urge to look around for signs of the backup teams that should be moving into position. "Will you need anything else from the next shipment?" Actually, yes. There's been a development that requires. Petrov's words were cut off by the sudden appearance of black SUVs at both entrances to the parking garage, their tires squealing against concrete as they moved to block any escape routes. Red and blue lights began flashing as federal agents poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn and voices shouting commands that echoed off the concrete walls. Federal agents, nobody move. Petrov's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: surprise, understanding, and finally a cold fear that made me take an involuntary step backward. The security specialist was already reaching inside his jacket, but the sight of a dozen armed agents convinced him to raise his hands instead. "Sarah," Petrov said quietly, his voice carrying a deadly calm that was more frightening than shouting would have been. "I believe you and I need to have a different conversation. Viktor Petrov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to steal military technology, money laundering, and violation of the Arms Export Control Act." Agent Wong's voice carried clearly across the garage, as she approached with her weapon trained on the arms dealer. "You have the right to remain silent." Petrov ignored her, keeping his eyes fixed on me with the intensity of someone memorizing details for future reference. "You've been very clever, Sarah, or should I call you by your real name?" "Sarah Thompson is my real name," I lied smoothly, maintaining the cover identity, even as agents moved to secure both suspects. "I don't know what you think is happening here." "I think," Petrov said, as Agent Park moved to handcuff him, "that we'll have an opportunity to continue this discussion very soon." The threat was unmistakable, but I forced myself to look confused rather than concerned. Sarah Thompson would be bewildered by the arrest, frightened by the implications, and completely unaware that she'd been participating in an elaborate federal sting operation. As the agents led Petrov and his associate toward the SUVs, Agent Wong approached me with what appeared to be official concern. "Miss Thompson, we'll need you to come with us for questioning. You're not under arrest, but we need to understand your involvement with these individuals." "My involvement?" I managed to inject the right note of panic into my voice. "I just provided shipping information. I thought Victor was a legitimate businessman interested in import opportunities." "We'll discuss that at the federal building," Agent Wong said, playing her part perfectly. "You're not in trouble, but we need a complete statement about your interactions with Mr. Petrov." As I was escorted toward one of the SUVs, I caught sight of Petrov watching me from the back seat of another vehicle. Even through the tinted glass, I could see him studying my face, filing away details for whatever revenge he might attempt to orchestrate from federal prison. The ride to the federal building felt surreal after 18 months of careful preparation. The operation had succeeded. Petrov was in custody with evidence that would guarantee a lengthy prison sentence, and my cover remained intact. From the outside, it would appear that Sarah Thompson had been an unwitting asset rather than a trained intelligence operative. But Petrov's final words echoed in my mind, carrying the promise of future consequences for the deception I'd orchestrated. Men like Viktor Petrov had long memories and extensive networks, and federal prison wouldn't necessarily protect me from his desire for retribution. At the federal building, Agent Wong led me through the same conference room where I'd been debriefed 2 days earlier, though this time our conversation was being recorded for the official case file. For 3 hours, I played the role of Sarah Thompson, providing a statement about her innocent involvement with international criminals, carefully omitting any details that would reveal my true identity or the planned nature of our operation. When the interview concluded, Agent Wong removed the recording equipment and locked the conference room door. "Outstanding work, Miss Rodriguez. Petrov's arrest will disrupt arms trafficking operations across 3 continents. What about his threat? He clearly suspects I'm not who I claim to be. Petrov says a lot of things. Without proof, his suspicions are just the complaints of a convicted criminal trying to shift blame for his arrest." Agent Wong sat back in her chair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her since Kyle's theft had threatened to derail the entire investigation. "Your cover held under direct scrutiny. That's the mark of exceptional tradecraft." Deputy Director Chen entered the room, carrying a folder marked with security classifications that suggested my next assignment was already being planned. "Miss Rodriguez, congratulations on a successful operation. The intelligence gathered from Petrov's organization has already led to arrests in 4 countries. And Kyle's situation, resolved as promised. He'll serve 6 months of community service and remain under federal monitoring for 2 years. The theft charges will be reduced to a misdemeanor if he complies with all conditions of his plea agreement." I should have felt relieved, but mostly I felt empty. 2 years of my life had culminated in a parking garage arrest that would probably be forgotten within a week. Kyle would walk away with minimal consequences for nearly destroying a federal investigation, while I would move on to the next assignment, the next cover identity, the next opportunity to risk my life, for people who would never know my real name. There's one more thing, Deputy Director Chen said, consulting her folder. Your brother has requested a meeting. He says he wants to apologize and try to understand what he put you through. The idea of sitting across from Kyle, of watching him struggle to reconcile his preconceptions with reality, held no appeal whatsoever. I'd spent years being lectured by someone who understood nothing about my life or my choices. The fact that he now wanted to apologize felt like too little, far too late. What would be the point? Kyle's sorry because he got caught and faced consequences. If the FBI hadn't gotten involved, he'd still think he did me a favor by stealing my car. Perhaps, Deputy Director Chen agreed. But people can change when they're forced to confront the full scope of their mistakes. Agent Wong leaned forward. For what it's worth, his demeanor during questioning suggested genuine remorse. He seems to understand that he fundamentally misjudged your situation and your capabilities. Kyle's always been good at saying what people want to hear when he's in trouble. True, Agent Wong acknowledged. But this time his future depends on following through on his promises. That might make the difference. I considered the request while thinking about the family dinner I'd attended just days before Kyle's theft, remembering his casual dismissal of my life, and his confident assertions about what I should do to improve my situation. The irony of him asking for a meeting now, when he finally understood that I'd been more successful than he'd ever imagined, felt almost comically appropriate. Tell Kyle that when he's completed his community service, and proven he can go 2 years without stealing from family members or borrowing money from loan sharks, I'll consider having a conversation with him. That seems fair, Deputy Director Chen said, making a note in her file. And your next assignment, whatever you need, I replied, feeling the familiar anticipation that came with new challenges and fresh cover identities. Though I'd prefer something that doesn't require maintaining close relationships with people who think I'm a failure. Agent Wong smiled at that. I think we can arrange something. How do you feel about international travel? As I left the federal building for what I hoped would be the last time in connection with Kyle's crime, I realized that my brother's theft had taught me something valuable about the cost of living multiple identities. The success I'd achieved in my real career meant nothing to the people who only knew my cover stories, while the cover stories I'd maintained meant nothing to the people who might actually care about my real achievements. Kyle had stolen my car because he thought I was someone who didn't deserve nice things. My parents supported him because they thought I was someone who should expect to be taken advantage of. Even Victor Petrov had targeted me because Sarah Thompson appeared to be someone whose desperation made her exploitable. The only people who knew my real worth were federal agents who measured success in terms of operational effectiveness and mission completion. It was a lonely kind of validation, but it was honest in a way that family relationships apparently couldn't be. My phone buzzed with a text message as I waited for the bus that would take me back to my carefully maintained cover apartment. It was from Agent Wong. Petrov's cell phone contained contacts for arms dealers in 12 countries. Your intelligence just helped us map an entire criminal network. Well done. I smiled as I put the phone away, thinking about Kyle sitting in our parents' house, probably trying to explain to them why he couldn't discuss his legal situation while federal agents used intelligence I'd gathered to arrest criminals around the world. He'd wanted me to be more ambitious, more successful, more willing to fight for what I wanted. He'd finally gotten his wish. He just hadn't realized that the kind of success worth having required intelligence, discipline, and the ability to sacrifice immediate gratification for long-term goals. Kyle had never learned any of those skills, but I had. And tomorrow I'd use them again in service of something bigger than family drama and petty theft. The bus arrived, and I climbed aboard, already thinking about my next assignment, and the new identity I'd need to create. Behind me, the federal building disappeared into the distance, along with the last remnants of the life Kyle had tried to steal from me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.